At 3:47 a.m., I heard someone dragging furniture across the floor directly above me. That alone wouldn't have scared me. What scared me was that the apartment above mine had been empty for 6 weeks, and I had personally watched the building manager nail the door shut 2 days before. I didn't move. I just sat there on my couch with the TV muted, staring at the ceiling, listening to that slow, deliberate scrape move from one end of the room to the other. Then it stopped, and something knocked on the floor above me. 3 times. Slow, like it knew I was listening. My name is Daniel. I'm 29. At the time of this, I was working a night editing job for a small online news outlet, which meant I was usually awake until 4 or 5 in the morning and asleep until noon. I lived alone in a mid-rise apartment building in a mid-sized city. Nothing special about it. 6 floors, maybe 40 units, old enough that the pipes made noise and the elevator took forever, but not the kind of place you'd ever think twice about. I'd lived there for about 2 years without a single problem. My neighbors were quiet. The building manager, a guy named Arlen, was responsive and decent. It was boring, honestly. Safe feeling. The kind of place you stop noticing after a while. The apartment directly above mine was 4B. A woman named Margaret had lived there the entire time I'd been in the building. She was maybe 65, kept to herself, nodded at you in the hallway. I didn't know much about her except that she had a small dog and she watered plants on her balcony every morning. Then one day in late October, the dog was gone, the plants were gone, and so was she. Arlen told me she'd moved in with her daughter somewhere out of state. Health reasons. He said it casually, the way building managers say everything, and I didn't think about it again. About a week after she left, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, something stale and slightly sour drifting down from somewhere above, the kind of smell you convince yourself is coming from your own trash. I took the trash out. The smell didn't go away. It wasn't overwhelming. It was just there, underneath everything, like old water in a vase you forgot about. I mentioned it to Arlen when I passed him in the lobby one morning. He nodded, said he'd check the unit, that sometimes when apartments sit empty the drain traps dry out and let in sewer gas. That sounded reasonable. I forgot about it, but the smell got a little worse over the following days. Not dramatically worse, just consistently worse, the way something does when you're not imagining it. I knocked on the door of 4B once, in the early evening, just out of curiosity. No answer, obviously. I pressed my ear against the door. I don't know why I did that. It just felt like the thing to do. And I heard nothing, just silence, and that smell seeping through the door frame in a way that made me step back. 2 days before the night I'm telling you about, I saw Arlen in the hallway on the 4th floor with a hammer and a short piece of wood. He was nailing a small board across the door of 4B at the latch, the kind of thing you do to keep a door from swinging open when the lock is broken. I asked him what was going on. He said the lock cylinder had been damaged. He thought maybe Margaret had lost her key at some point and someone had tried to force it, and that he was waiting on a replacement part. He was just keeping it secure in the meantime. He seemed unbothered. I went back downstairs. So when I heard that furniture dragging at 3:47 in the morning 2 nights later, I already had a small pile of slightly strange things sitting in the back of my mind. Not enough to feel afraid, just enough that the sound hit me differently than it should have. I sat still for about 2 minutes after the knocking stopped. The building was completely quiet other than the usual hum of the ventilation system. I turned the TV back on low volume and told myself it was the building settling or pipes or some acoustics trick that made distant sounds seem close. Old buildings do weird things at night. I knew that. I'd heard strange sounds before. I went back to my work, or tried to, but I kept glancing up at the ceiling. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Not dragging this time. Footsteps. Slow, flat-footed steps moving across the ceiling, pausing, then continuing. I know what footsteps sound like. I've heard my upstairs neighbors in every apartment I've ever lived in, and I know the particular rhythm of a person walking, the slight creak of weight shifting, the pause when someone stops to look at something. This was that. This was exactly that. I turned the TV off. I sat in the dark and I listened, and the footsteps crossed the ceiling once more, stopped near what I guessed was the middle of the room, and then went quiet. I checked my phone. For 11 a.m. I pulled up Arlen's contact and typed out a message telling him I was hearing sounds from 4B and asking if anyone was supposed to be up there. I stared at the message for a second, feeling a little embarrassed about it, and then sent it anyway. He was asleep, obviously. I didn't expect a response. I got up and walked to my front door and looked through the peephole at the hallway. Empty. I stood there for a moment, then did something I still question. I opened my door quietly and stepped out into the hallway. I don't fully know why. Partly curiosity, partly that particular irrational need to confirm that the scary thing isn't real, so you can go back to feeling normal. I took the stairwell up one floor. The fourth floor hallway was lit the same as always, those long fluorescent strips, one of them flickering slightly near the elevator the way it always did. The hallway was empty. I walked to 4B. The board Arlen had nailed across the latch was still there, still nailed in place. The door looked undisturbed. I stood in front of it and listened and heard nothing. The smell was still there though, noticeably stronger out here in the hallway than it had been even 2 days ago. I stood there maybe 30 seconds, feeling foolish, and then I went back downstairs and locked my door and went to bed. I told myself it had been the building, pipes, old wood, whatever. Arlen messaged me back around 9 a.m. He said he'd check it out. I slept through most of the day and woke up to another message from him, sent around 2 p.m., that said simply, "Called the non-emergency line, you should probably know. Come see me when you're up." That phrasing, "you should probably know." I read it 4 or 5 times. I got dressed and went down to Arlen's office on the ground floor and knocked. And when he opened the door, his face had that look people get when they're about to tell you something they don't want to tell you. He had gone up to check 4B that morning after my message. He'd noticed the smell himself on the way down the hall, much stronger, he said, than when he'd been up there 2 days before. He'd removed the board and opened the door, and what he found was that the apartment had not been empty the way he thought it had been. Someone had been living in it. There was a sleeping bag in the middle of the living room floor, a small backpack, empty food containers, and several empty water bottles. Whoever it was had been coming in and out through the balcony. The sliding door had the latch broken, something that apparently hadn't been noticed when Margaret left. The unit shared a balcony divider with the unit next to it, and from there you could access the exterior fire stairs. The board on the front door hadn't mattered at all. The police came and looked. Whoever had been there was gone by then. They found no ID, nothing identifying. Just those few items and the smell, which the officers said was consistent with someone living in an enclosed space without access to a bathroom for some time. They took the backpack. They filed a report. They told Arlen to fix the balcony door and change the lock and left. I stood in Arlen's office after he told me all of this, and I tried to put the timeline together. The smell had started roughly a week after Margaret left. Maybe the day after, maybe 2 days after. It was hard to pin down, meaning whoever this was had moved in almost immediately. For at least 5 weeks, there had been a person living in the apartment directly above mine, walking around up there, sleeping up there. The footsteps I'd heard at 3 a.m. had been real. The dragging I'd heard had been real. But there was one part Arlen told me almost as an afterthought, the way people mention things they haven't fully processed yet. When the officers were looking through the apartment, they found, near the balcony door, a small pile of items that appeared to have come from the units below and adjacent, things that had been left on balconies. A planter, a folded lawn chair, a child's ball, a pair of shoes someone had left outside their balcony door, things taken from other people's balconies over the past several weeks, carried up and kept for reasons no one could explain. My balcony door, I suddenly remembered, I had never once checked whether it was locked. I went upstairs immediately and checked it. It was locked. It had been locked. I stood there with my hand on the latch and looked out at the divider between my balcony and the one next to mine, which was maybe 4 feet of concrete and a waist-high partition wall, and I thought about the 5 weeks, the smell drifting down through the ceiling, the footsteps in the early morning, the 3 slow knocks on the floor. I thought about the shoes on someone's balcony taken. I thought about someone up there in the dark for 5 weeks, watching which apartments had lights on and which were dark, watching the building understand its rhythms, learning who was home and when, learning that I was awake until 4 in the morning, learning the pattern of a building the way you do when you have nothing but time and darkness and no one knows you're there. They never found who it was. Arlen sent a notice to all residents to check their balcony doors and report anything missing. 2 other residents mentioned small items gone. No one had seen anything. No one had an answer. The officers said it was likely someone in a difficult situation, which is probably true, and which doesn't make it feel less strange. I moved out about 6 weeks later, not in a panic. I finished my lease, I found a new place, I left normally. But I checked my balcony door every single night between Arlen telling me and the day I moved out, and every time I heard any sound from above, my chest tightened before I could stop it. The thing is, I don't know what that person was doing up there. I don't know what they wanted or whether they had ever tried my balcony door and found it locked and moved on, or whether they'd stood on their side of that divider at 3 in the morning and looked at my door while I sat 12 feet below them on my couch with the TV on. I don't know if the 3 knocks meant anything. I don't know if they knew I'd heard them. I think about the 5 weeks sometimes, late at night in my new apartment, in those quiet minutes before I fall asleep. 5 weeks of someone living above me, quiet enough that I only noticed near the end. 5 weeks of me going about my life, making food, watching TV, sitting at my desk working until 4 in the morning with the lamp on, completely unaware. Close enough that sound traveled through the floor between us like we were almost in the same room. Whatever they needed, I hope they found it somewhere safer. But I check my balcony door every night. I don't think I'll ever stop.